Hi, welcome to the Online Jewelry Academy. I'm Professor John Ahr and I'm your instructor. In two previous videos, I showed you how to make these two great projects, a pair of beaded earrings and a bracelet that both use a forging technique, which is quite simple, that's only applied to some simple up and down loops. In this video, what I want to do is show you how you can expand upon this really simple technique to create more products with variation to expand your product line so you can increase your sales. Now, using this exact same technique, I shrunk the loops down in order to create this pair of hoop earrings. And I think these are a great pair of earrings for most women. The excess of this material I actually utilized to make this ring, and the great part about this ring is that it can be expanded or contracted due to the nature of the way that it's been constructed. Now, I got a little crazy and made the loops a little bit bigger and created sort of a radial construction here with these larger fashion hoop earrings. So this might appeal to a younger client. And I also expanded on this idea and made it a little smaller. And here you can see I created a simple pendant, and by repeating this same shape using repetition, I created a statement necklace. Now, the featured element of the repeated flower shapes could also be used to make a great bracelet. Let me clear these away and I'll show you how it's done. Before I show you how to make the projects, let me go over some of the tools that you're going to need. You'll need your jeweler saw, a bench block. Of course, you're going to need the wire that you're going to be working with. Now, all of the projects that I've made were constructed from 16 gauge round copper wire. And if I applied any kind of an ear wire, you always want to use 20 gauge round wire. And you always want to make sure that you're using either a precious metal or surgical steel. Otherwise, you could cause an infection in someone's ear. So in this case, I have 20 gauge round sterling silver and a 16 gauge round copper wire. I have a variety of pliers and a pair of diagonal cutters. And one thing I want to point out about the pliers is that in terms of the round nose or rosary pliers, in another video I showed you how to stripe the jaws of the plier so that you could have some kind of consistency whenever you use those pliers, and that can be important to this project. So if you haven't striped your round nose pliers yet, you might want to do it. You'll also need a file, a rawhide or plastic or wooden mallet, and a Cross-Peen hammer. Remember, the Cross-Peen hammer is the one that has the straight back. And this is the hammer that magically will stretch things in only one of two directions, either that way or this way. If you use the other side of the hammer, it's like stepping on a cockroach. It just goes splat in all directions. You may also want to use a permanent marking pen and a ruler for this project. And of course, because we're going to solder ends together, we need a soldering setup. So I have my Butane Torch. I have a pair of cross-locking tweezers that are on a third hand for holding materials. And then from the bottom up over here, I have, sitting on top of a Lazy Susan, a piece of Kiln Shelf that's going to protect the bench surface while I heat on top of this compressed charcoal block. Now, while I'm soldering, I will need to apply flux, so I have a flux brush and I have a soldering pick. And I've also got my hard solder and my white paste flux. Now, it's important when you finish soldering anything that you quench the work and your tools so you don't burn yourself. So I have a quenching bowl here that's just filled with clear water. And of course, whenever you solder, you need to work in a well-ventilated space. Remember, work with some type of open window so you have fresh air coming in, and use your ventilation system to escape all the bad fumes. And we have a video on how to make this simple ventilation system. Okay, let me clear the desk once again and then I'll show you step by step how to make these projects. Okay, now we're ready to start with the process of making the project. The first thing is put on your eye protection. You never know, and it's always smart to work safely. Okay, I've got all the tools that I need laid out, and I just want to tell you guys, you can use whatever size wire you want to for this project. Now, on some of these finer things like the pair of earrings that I made here, I did use a 16 gauge round, but you could use a smaller or larger wire. You'll get a slightly different effect, but experiment and figure out what works best for you and your clients. Okay, so I like to work a little bit freely. And what I did when I made my little pieces is I just used the width of the pliers as my guide. Now, if you're somebody who's a little bit more cautious and you're not really sure about your skill level, you can break out your ruler, and you could use your ruler along with a permanent marker, and you could just line up your wire and mark at regular intervals where you need to make the bends. And like I said, you could bring out your pliers that you've put stripes on to make sure that you're always consistently making the curve at the same point to get the exact same curve. You don't need to be that fastidious in your work. You want to be a little bit loose, and the process is a little bit forgiving. Okay, now that said, let's move on. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use the width of the pliers to just initiate the first bend. So I'm just going to bend it back on itself like that. Then if I put the pliers back in and I go to the opposite direction, what I can do is I can quickly, just using the tool and its jaws as a guide all by themselves, I can start to make a zigzag pattern. Okay, so I have a pretty sloppy zigzag going on, but the thing that's great about this is if I tighten it up, it'll give me the ability to create something like the ring or the earrings that I had done before. Or if I want to keep this a little bit looser, I might be able to open it up to create this radial for the larger type of hoop earring. But you'll notice the zigs and zags on this hoop earring are much larger than what I'm working with here. Okay, so I'm going for one of the little flower shapes. So as soon as I'm done making all these zigs and zags, I can cut off that area that I've worked. Now what I can do is, if I want to, I can sharpen up each of these little petals. And all I really have to do is just kind of bend from one side to do that. And you'll notice as I'm bending, what just naturally sort of happens is the piece will take on that radial sort of appearance. So I'm really just incrementally stepping closer and closer to having that petal form all on its own. Okay, so now I can bend these things around. Remember, your pliers are almost like super strong baby fingers. You know, you want to get them in there and put them to work for you so you don't have to work so hard. Okay, so let me condense this a little bit more. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find a point where I can put the piece together and have it seem to be a unified whole. You're going to have to solder this, so I'm looking for that little bit of overlap. Now, it's probably best if you get the overlap on a straight overlap connection, but if you get it on a curve, it's fine. It'll all work out because you're not really hammering on this all that hard. Okay, so now I'm going to saw through the overlapped parts. So I'm just going to sit at the bench pin, and I've got those two pieces lined up, and all I have to do is just saw through them. Remember, whenever you're working with anything at the bench pin when you're sawing, be sure to support it. Okay. Alright, so I've cut through both sections, and you can see there's a gap right there. But what I can do is I can start to move things together and make them sit right. So I'm going to just knock this to flatten it down a little bit. So I'm using my Rawhide Mallet on the bench block, and then I'm just going to take my fingers and try to push these pieces back and forth until they connect with one another right there. So I want to solder that butt joint. So I'm going to take this over to my charcoal block. Remember, you want to work near ventilation so that you don't inhale bad fumes and odors that can cause health problems. Okay, so I'm using a white paste flux, and I'm going to take my flux brush, and I'm going to take just a small amount of flux and paint it over that seam. Remember, solder won't go where there isn't any flux. Okay, so let me close up my flux so it doesn't dry out. And now I'm going to take a pallion of solder and place it on top of the seam. And today I'm going to work a little bit quick and dirty. I'm just going to pick it up with my brush and drop it right there. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to go. All I need to do is ignite the torch and solder this. Now remember, always heat the larger area first in order to bring the whole piece up to temperature to get the solder to go where you want it. And remember, Flux is a water-based vehicle, and if you heat it up too fast, it can throw the soldered pallion off. All right, so we're going to light the torch. And, whoops, let me get my solder pick from over here. Always have your solder pick just in case. And I'm just going to lightly start to heat the piece to just dry out the flux. And you can see the solder move just a bit, and that's why we have a pick. We put it back in place, and I just continue with the heating process. Part of working economically with sustainability in your shop is to just be efficient with the tools that you use and with your fuel source. Okay, so we're taking this piece of copper through the steps. It got a little bit of heat staining. Now it's getting up to a more red color, which means it's near annealing, and there it goes. The solder flowed right into the seam without having to do any manipulation. Okay, so remember, once you finish soldering, you want to pick up your work and quench it. And if you used any tools in the process, quench them too in order to keep them cool so you don't burn yourself. All right, so I'm going to put this back over here on the bench block so you can see it. Let me dry it off so it doesn't rust my bench block. But now you can see here's where the piece was soldered together. Now remember, anytime that you solder, you're actually heating the piece to a point where you're actually annealing it too. So now if you need to reshape it, you can do a little bit more manipulation right now. Let me clean this up and I'll show you how to texturize it. Okay, I got my flour out of the pickle pot and here it is, ready to be textured. Now if you look right there, you can see, or kind of see, where the seam is that I soldered shut. Now if you want to hide that seam completely and you're working with copper, we have a video on how to use your used pickle to plate over that silver solder and disguise that seam completely. And you could always send a piece like this out to a professional plater, turning it gold or silver. All right, so I'm going to pick up my Cross-Peen Hammer with the straight end, and basically all I'm going to do is I'm going to be consistent with the blows. And what I want to do is bring the blows towards me in a straight, repeated pattern. So I'm going to start on one pedal, and I'll start near the back, and I'm just going to start to hit it. You can see I'm not hitting it very hard. So basically all I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue my way all the way around my pendant. It's that easy. And now I have a beautifully textured element. Now these elements, you can do whatever you want with them. You could turn this into a stud earring. You could become a pendant, just like I did right here, where I added a little bail to the top of one of these and just added it to a chain. In repetition, they could be a bracelet, a statement necklace, whatever you want them to be. Just concentrate on using this idea of variation to create a wide variety of products for your clients. That will improve your sales and make you more money. Tips like this can be found on our Twitter feed, so you could follow the Online Jewelry Academy on Twitter, or you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And remember, you can always check out any of the other videos that we've made so far on our website or our YouTube channel. You'll find our website at onlinejewelryacademy.com. And if we've found a special place in your heart, you can always make a donation to us as well. We even have a video on that. Thanks for watching and hope you'll come back soon.